David Heine, Aspect Art. Today we're in Leiden at the Naturalis Museum, where they've mounted a very special show about the Japanese-Nederland relationship for 400 years. It was a small island that they were consigned to. First the Portuguese lived there and they were kicked out because of religious problems with the shogun in Japan. But the Dutch, in their manner of trading, became the new heirs to this small island of Dejima. From this island they did all their trading. But while they were there, and only 2 ships came from the Netherlands in a single year, so there's a lot of idle time. Usually the doctor on the island made collections of what he could get from the mainland Japan. Much of this collecting was done in the 17th century. This show, however, is primarily about the 19th century, when William I came back onto the throne and decided that it was time to really understand those countries that, in fact, the Netherlands was trading with. By doing so, there was the possibility for profit. So join us now for Dejima at the Naturalis. We're in the Naturalis in Leiden with Herbert Mattie, who's going to tell us about the new exhibition that they've just mounted about Dejima. What exactly is Dejima?
Dejima was the artificial island in the Bay of Nagasaki on which the Dutch trading post was housed from the year 1641 till 1856. And during this time there were always about 10 to 20 Dutch people, and they were housed on this trading post, and they had the exclusive trading position with the Japanese. Therefore it was a very important place because this was the connection between Japan and the West.
Now, how exactly did the Dutch get in this very fortunate and opportune position?
Well, the first Dutchman set foot ashore in Japan in the year 1600, and for that reason in the year 2000 the 400th anniversary of the Dutch-Japanese relation will be celebrated. From the year 1609 there were trade relations, and in that time there was still the concurrence of the Portuguese and the English. The English left Japan by their free will because this trade wasn't very good for them. The Portuguese were expelled because their Christian mission caused political instability of the country.
Now, in the exhibition, what have you included?
In the exhibition are included the 3 Japanese collections from 3 Leiden museums. These are the National Museum of Ethnology, Naturalis, the National Museum of Natural History, and the State Herbarium, or the National Herbarium. So these are plant collections, animal collections, and ethnographic collections.
Now, in the ethnographic collections, I noticed a number of prints that depict the Dutch in that period of time. Could you tell us a little about those?
Yes. Being the only Westerners in Japan, the Dutch were, the Japanese were very interested in how the Dutch looked and how they lived. So there were many prints made, and these are woodcuts meant to be sold to the Japanese, depicting the Dutch and their habits and the way they dressed and what they did.
Well, let's talk a little about the life in the 17th century living on this artificial island in Japan. How was it?
It was like being on a prison because they couldn't leave this island. The island was very small. It was 233 meters by 70 meters, and there was very little to do. For there only came 2 ships a year from Holland with the trading goods. And the only thing they had to do was making music or having parties or amusing themselves with the Japanese prostitutes, who were the only women allowed to be on Dejima.
Now, did families ever move there, or was it just strictly men traders there?
There were only men traders, yes. And apart from the official trade in name of the VOC, the Dutch East Indies Company, they had also private trades, which often they made a fortune with.
Well, what exactly was traded from Japan to the Netherlands and vice versa?
It was mainly lacquerware and porcelain, and also copper and silver.
And what did the Dutch bring them?
They brought textiles from India and China mainly, and herbs and spices from Indonesia.
Now, life there must have, as you say, been a great deal like prison. How long did a VOC person remain on Dejima?
In the beginning, only 1 year was allowed. Later, the Japanese regulation became more easy for the Dutch, and they were allowed to stay on Dejima for 5 or 10 years. Like was the case, for instance, with this Philip van Siebold, who stayed on Dejima from 1823 to 1829.
So, how long did this island exist, and what is its condition today?
It was founded in 1639 originally for the Portuguese, but they were expelled, and the Dutch trading post was settled from 1641 until it became unnecessary because Japan founded trade relations with America and England and Russia. So in the years of about 1856, the houses were sold and the wall was pulled down, and the Dutch could move freely through Japan. And nowadays there's only very little remaining. This part of Nagasaki Bay is filled with parts of town, and you can only see a model of Dejima where it once was, and some very scarce remaining items like the sun clock and a monument that was erected by van Siebold to honor his predecessors Kempfer and Thunberg.
It's my understanding that in this period of time, because the Japanese were restricted in their contact with the West, that in fact the Japanese scientific language actually became Nederlands. Could you tell me a little about that?
Yes, that's true. The Dutch were the only people the Japanese scholars could have contact with. So to learn from them about Western science, they had to master the Dutch language. And you can see in our exhibition some examples of this. There are herbarium leaves with notes attached, and these notes are in Dutch handwriting by Japanese scholars.
Let's get back to the exhibition itself. Now, some of these, not just the ethnographic, but the natural plants and animals that you've exhibited here are quite unique, aren't they, in some ways?
Yes, they are unique for several reasons. In the first place, Japan never had this tradition of collecting, and therefore often these animals and plants that were collected by the Dutch in this era are unique, because they were the only ones to collect these animals and plants. Some of the plants and animals are extinct already, and many of them are described for the first time to science, meaning in these Leiden collections are the specimens that we call type specimens, the specimens that were first described for scientific reasons.
So in between the partying and the prostitutes, they actually did some scientific inquiry?
That's true, and especially the doctor, who had, by his profession, the most knowledge of Western science.
Now, some of the drawings actually weren't made for art, were they, originally?
Well, they were made by an artist, but the reason of making them was pure documentary. They were made by Kawahara Keiga, who was a Japanese artist working in service of the Dutch at Dejima, and he depicted everything that the Dutch asked him to. So he made pictures of landscapes, of cityscapes, of profession, arts and crafts, and also beautiful pictures of animals. And they are mainly appreciated for their documentary function, but they are very beautiful as well.
Could you tell me something about the collecting these items?
Yes, this collecting was done for two reasons. Firstly, the collectors were curious people. They collected these items for scientific curiosity, and on the other hand, there was a trading purpose as well. They hoped once to become rich by exploiting the natural richness of Japan.
Now, of course, as I know from some of the Rembrandt special we're working on now, and we went to Rembrandts Schaatkamer, that in fact it was a big trade to have unusual items coming into Amsterdam from the VOC ships. Was this part of what they were collecting for, to send back as curiosities?
Yes, especially in Rembrandt's time, the 17th century. These were really cabinets of rarities, and the items that were collected were especially beautiful or bizarre items. In the 18th century, these collections became more scientific, meaning that they formed a sort of encyclopedia of what nature had to offer. There were hundreds of collections in the Netherlands in this century. But in the end of the 18th century, Netherlands became poor. There was the French era, which resulted in the especially from 1810 to 1813, when the Netherlands were a part of French. And these collections were all sold, and nowadays it's very hard to find out where they had gone. But when King William I came on the throne in Holland, he took some initiatives to renew this collecting habit, and this resulted in all the Japanese collections that are in Leiden today.
Now, these collections aren't necessarily just 19th century. They come from things collected in the 17th and 18th century also. Is that correct?
Yes, but the collections that we are showing in Museum Dejima are all from the first half of the 19th century.
Now, speaking of that, how long will this exhibit be on display?
It will be on display till the 12th of March in 2000.
And when people want to come to Leiden to see it, what are your hours and what days are you open?
The museum is opened from 12 to 6, except on Mondays. And in school holidays it's open from 10 to 6, also on Mondays.
Well, thank you very much for talking with us today.
You're welcome.